In order to understand indigenous knowledge within the context of Africa and climate change, one should first of all understand that life in Africa did not start with the coming Europeans. Before the coming Europeans and until today, Africans lived in different natural and cultural environments and tried to adapt to different natural conditions and changing climatic conditions. And in the process of living those natural conditions, they develop different knowledge, skills to adapt to different changes in the climate and also to produce the basic needs of life. So it's these knowledge systems which they developed, these strategies to adapt to changing environmental conditions, including climatic conditions, which we call indigenous knowledge systems. But if you look at now the question of different strategies to mitigate and adapt to climate change, they've tended to marginalize these community knowledge systems which have seen our people over the years and centuries, which most of our people still depend on them for life. And these are the type of knowledge systems which we need to promote.
But how much do we know about these indigenous knowledge systems? Because the problem with it is that some people may say, well, there isn't that well of knowledge. There isn't that, we can't go to a library and research these IKSs.
Yeah, this is why we are trying to develop different strategies of incorporating indigenous knowledge system in the school curriculum, in the educational system, and that's why we are also trying to mobilize young people from all different parts of the continent to document these knowledge systems so that they can be shared with different sectors of society, and they can also contribute to the current search for sustainable solutions to climate change adaptation mitigation.
But again, the relevance, given modern day advances, given modern day technology, how relevant would those systems still be?
We must also understand that, community knowledge is community-based. And the global challenges of climate change, they affect everybody within Africa and outside Africa. So that's why when we document these indigenous knowledge systems, we try to identify their gaps and try to see how can we interface our community knowledge system, which are community-based, with the other knowledge system, including new modern science and technology systems, so that they can also meet the global challenges of climate change, adaptation and mitigation.
Professor Kai, I'm going to ask you for some examples in a minute, but let me bring in Mr. Gwambe here. Mr. Gwambe, your views on the relevance of these indigenous knowledge systems today?
There is great relevance. You see, the problem of being colonized, left and right and all that, the colonizer brings his own system, and they supplant everything that you know, how you conduct yourself. Now you're going to live like us. This is how, if you say science is only when you have this and you test it in the laboratory. Let me just bring another dimension in this thing.
Yeah.
Like the professor saying, this IKS will be a community-based knowledge. Many African communities used to relate their agricultural practices within the astronomical phenomena and all that. For the agriculture to make agronomical decisions, they knew how to read the stars and make great decisions. In terms of harvest, they knew that, okay, now we can relax a little bit and enjoy our mkombo or some beer and all that, because still some time will come. But that we don't have anymore, because first we dispossessed even the ownership of the land where we could practice that, so that we depend entirely on a scientific approach of mechanized agriculture, that whatever we used to practice, our ancestors used to practice, is no longer available, because now we are also influenced by technologies and all that. That's why it seems that even in the young mind of an African scientist, you say, okay, if I can't test something or prove or sense it, it means that it doesn't exist. So it's not necessarily, there's still more relevance, because some communities still survive on the basis of those things. That's why even today in Limpopo, somebody quoted Limpopo that you had this, the issue of Queen Mujaji, for instance, where every year you go to this. It was part and parcel of those things, climate and the life of the community, and determine the harvesting and all that, the life cycles, the rites of passages will also determine parcel of the environment. So it's just that because things are not documented, then they don't seem to be relevant.
Now, that's the problem, isn't it, Mr. Gwambe? Because then the question is, where do you go in order to get this information and apply it to today's challenges?
Yeah, like Professor was saying, that it's community-based. It's on the base of this community, because because they were regarded to be irrelevant. So the knowledge is still there, but it still needs to be documented and catalogued properly and start to understand. It seems when it comes to African knowledge, specifically, these things are neglected. But you'll see people talking, about Chinese medicine. This came from Korea. Let me go. This from Japan or India. They are even commercialized, and we are allowed to go there and buy those products. But and we are blocked to develop our own. So going to communities, the remnant of those who have that knowledge, we still have to go and approach them and tell them that this is very valuable.
All right.
And not necessarily to commodify that.
All right. Sure. I would like to open the lines as well for communities, by the way, so that they can then share those experiences with us. If you know some of those practices that can be relevant to today's challenges, let's hear from you at 34701. That's our SMS line. But also give us a call on 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. Professor, I was talking a little earlier on about some of the examples of these systems that can still be very valuable to today.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, the issue of drought, which is one of the adverse effects of climate change, you find in different parts of the continent. You go to Kenya, you go to Tanzania, you go to Cameroon, people use different behaviors of animals, for instance, behaviors of insects, behaviors of plants, different natural organisms, the way they behave under different changing climatic conditions as early warning systems to prepare themselves. If you look at, for instance, the tsunami which happened in Indonesia, for instance, a number of people survived after knowing the behavior of them and then ran to the highlands, and that's how they survived. So there are a number of different knowledge systems within communities which people know over the years, which most of this knowledge is, of course, with the elderly section of society. But they pass on this knowledge in their community to young generations to see how they adapt to climate change conditions. As I said, they use the behavioral living organisms, early warning systems, and the other aspect which they know in their communities, which can give them a clue that the weather is changing. But as someone was pointing out initially when you were talking to the people in Limpopo, is that initially in the old days, these things they could foretell because the patterns were known. But now, because of influence from outside, global effects of climate change are not community-based only. They also come from outside. They greenhouse gas emissions. So all these conditions have changed the way our communities used to know changing weather patterns. That's why I said even the knowledge to adapt to them must also be global, because the effects of climate change are global. That's why we need to identify the community knowledge system and try to see how can we interface the gaps which exist in the communities with the global knowledge and global challenges.
And what are the difficulties, though, in bringing those knowledge systems to the fore? Do you think that there are people perhaps who are stopping indigenous African communities from bringing them to the fore?
As one of the colleagues said, you find that the dominance of Western knowledge systems, the dominance of international capital, they're making money out of some of the strategies which are being developed or which we want to do, or which is sustainable. For instance, there are a lot of people within our continent, outside the continent, who do not appreciate or understand what indigenous knowledge systems are all about, because the knowledge is not documented or because it threatens their own economic and other interests. So it becomes a challenge to promote these knowledge systems. But it says that we mobilize the young people who are currently also being affected by the knowledge system, or also the future generations who will be affected in terms of depletion of natural resources, because if there are no natural resources, also the employment opportunities are limited. So they need to know these things, propagate them, promote them, and those who are involved in the scientific field, they should work with the international community and with the communities, as we pointed out, to ensure that these knowledge systems survive and they are adapted and they become part of the global initiatives like the COP17 where we are going, to ensure that they become part and parcel of the global policy strategies to adaptation and mitigation of climate change.
Okay, that's interesting, Professor. So you're going to COP17?
Yeah, we're going to COP17.
In other words, there is a platform for you to articulate these views.
Yeah, we have two platforms there. One of them is the 29th. We are going to be in the Rio Pavilion, where we are going to have roundtable discussions on how young scientists in Africa and the world at large can participate, promote indigenous knowledge systems for adaptation of and mitigation of climate change. We are also going on the 30th. We organize another big roundtable discussion at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in partnership with the Department of Science and Technology, the National IKS office, where also people from different parts of the world will come there, discuss and share experiences on how we can promote indigenous knowledge as part of the strategies for climate change adaptation mitigation.
Okay, let's take some calls here on 0891 104 208. Alfie in Ramsach, good morning.
If you sell knowledge systems in isolation, you create a problem, and you bring in issues, as someone said earlier on, of colonized systems and so forth. But once you bring in a system as a solution and in context of issues that needs to be resolved, I don't think anybody will have the guts to kick out that system. And what is the knowledge after all? Knowledge is supposed to be applied. It's supposed to be, solution-driven. I know in South Africa, for example, we've been debating issues like African leadership, for example. But at the end of the day, that should be adapted, to the global context. And the danger and the risk that we're facing is that most of the time we want to defend and we want to isolate knowledge. And remember, Tolan, there is an element here that kicks in. You can only talk about knowledge systems in a knowledge society. But in a society that is still confused, where you still have people not believing in knowledge, still are based on resource economies and so forth, then you are challenged. So this matter is complex, and the approach must be transdisciplinary. Before you want people to understand it, you must also seek, to be understood.
All right, Elfie in Rensach, thank you very much. Thanks indeed. I'm going to ask Mr. Gwambe to respond in a minute, but let me go to Eddie. Eddie, good morning.
Lani, I'm telling you, I'm a farmer. I've been studying weather for 33 years. I'm a farmer. I'm outside pruning my trees, planting my minis, counting and doing everything possible to make it rain. Let me tell you now, unequivocally, when the north wind blows, within 3 days it rains. Let me tell you unequivocally, from the east, when you've got lightning in the east, within 3 days it rains. When the ants build nests in the road, it's going to rain. None of that is happening. When the snakes go over the road, we know it's going to rain. None of that is happening. You know why in Tatequalani? Because there's weather control. I promise you, go on the site, HAARP, HAARP, High Active Auroral Radio Program. This morning I was outside cutting thorns with my staff up in the mountains. I said, look, here's one plane, here's another plane, and the wind immediately changes. This thing will not be solved. COP17 will be a dismal failure. In actual fact, it will be a fantastic failure, Eddie, because they're not addressing the right issues. It is not to do with carbon emissions. It's all about weather control, because the New World Order says we must get rid of the farmer to control South Africa, because they want the minerals. They don't care about you. They don't care about me. I've seen it for Peter. But in 1980, kicked me out of his meeting in Bethlehem. He said, Eddie Vermaat, you are not allowed to talk about weather control. It is being done, but it is limited information. We don't want you here. They kicked me out of the meeting, 1980. My friend, I ask you, this COP17 that has started addressing the real issues, the alternative answer is weather wall.